Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
What, did you think the thumbnail was a joke? This is Disgaea. It's the strangest RPG series I've ever played. Everything from the story to the characters to even the gameplay is so over the top and ridiculous that it can be hard to see these games as anything but a parody. And the 7th game in the series is no different. With attacks that launch lasers visible from space, scenes that parody classic anime like Dragon Ball and Yu-Gi-Oh!, and health bars that look like this. Every aspect of Disgaea 7 is filled to the brim with some of the most absurd ideas you'll find anywhere, so you wouldn't be crazy to think this whole thing from top to bottom is a total joke, but it actually has one of the most clever and well thought out gameplay systems I've ever seen. And it's not just the brilliant gameplay. Disgaea 7 uses its humor and lighthearted nature to mask a story about depression, identity, generational trauma, and even the fear of confronting one's own mortality. No, I'm just kidding. That'd be... Wait, did this game actually cover... So what is Disgaea 7? Well, it's a strategy RPG where your goal is to either defeat every enemy on the map with simple characters, spaces, and stories. You don't have to use just Okay, look, I promise it's not as complicated as it seems. Each aspect of this game builds onto the next. It's kinda like a pyramid, and what waits for us at the top is this wonderful idea that I wasn't expecting to find, but was thoroughly impressed and amazed by. So let's tackle this one at a time, starting with the basics. Disgaea 7 is a strategy RPG, like Fire Emblem or Final Fantasy Tactics. Nearly every single map starts with a mission which will fall into one of two categories, either defeat all of the enemies or defeat one single boss. Upon completing the latter, the stage will automatically end regardless of how many enemies are left standing. This is pretty simple strategy RPG stuff, but Disgaea 7 mixes things up a fair bit. It starts with the base panel. All of your units are stationed here before they're deployed into battle. You can send them out or back in at will on any turn. However, once they've taken an action on that turn, they can no longer return to the base panel. You can access the base panel whenever you want, and you can deploy any unit you've ever recruited with a limit of 10 units on the map at any given time. So while Disgaea does share a lot of fundamental similarities with traditional strategy RPGs, this is where the similarities mostly end. There are 3 major mechanics that really set Disgaea apart and give it its own unique feel. Geopanels are these special tiles that grant certain effects when standing on them. Some of these are simple, like increased magic range or lowered movement, and you can see how these might alter the gameplay a bit. Maybe the game will station some mages on the magic range tiles, allowing them to effectively act as turrets that your party has to find a way around. Or maybe an entire half of the map will be covered in lower movement to prevent you from accessing something valuable over there without using a character with especially high movement. But these effects can get a lot more complicated than simple stat modulation. To understand how, let's look at the second half of geopanels. This is a geo symbol. These are what give geopanels their effects. When a symbol is on a panel, every panel of that color on the entire stage gains that effect. Okay, so there's one last thing you need to know before we can get into a real example of how this works in practice. This is called a clear geo symbol. What this does is it destroys the geopanel color that it's on. So if a clear symbol is on a red panel and you destroy it, then all red panels on the stage will disappear, along with whatever effects that they had. Now, if you don't immediately see why this has the potential to create some of the coolest stage designs you've ever seen, I don't blame you. I didn't either at first. But lucky for us, the developers certainly did. So check this out. In this stage, the blue geo panels have this thing called super encroach. This is an effect that causes the blue panels to expand onto adjacent panels every turn. That's all it does. This doesn't really mean anything by itself, but if you've been paying attention, you might already see why this could be a bit of a dangerous situation. I'll give you a few seconds to figure it out. The answer is literally right in front of you. Now, if you said something along the lines of, this thing right here is going to cause problems, you'd be right. Here's what's going to happen. Every turn, this blue panel will get just a bit bigger. In 3 turns time, when it reaches this symbol, it'll gain a new effect. That red symbol right there, its effect is enemy boost. So the moment that timer runs out, every enemy on this ever-expanding range will have all of their stats increased by 50%. But it gets worse. See, on the other side, there's yet another symbol in a similar position with a different effect. This symbol will cause the silence debuff, and if you've played exactly one RPG in your life, you probably have an idea of what this does. In the case of Disgaea though, it disables all special attacks, not just magic. This will disable your opponent's specials as well, but remember, they'll have a stat boost, so if it comes down to a pure slugfest with nothing but normal attacks, attacks, you're at a heavy disadvantage. This creates a stage that still shares the same goal of defeat some enemies, but with the added depth that allows for a sea of options on how you'd like to accomplish that goal. There's a clear symbol up here, and there's a 4-panel wide gap between the base panel where you start and the solid ground near this symbol, so if you want you can launch a character right into the middle and break the symbol to avoid the silence and enemy boost. But if you do that, you're effectively and quite literally throwing that character to the wolves. Not only that, but because this symbol is in a pocket by itself, you're probably going to need a ranged unit like a gunner, archer, or mage to hit it. Gunners, archers, and mages aren't exactly known for their defense. So are you so worried about this enemy boost that you'll throw your softer units into a dangerous position, or are you willing to take the risk of charging straight ahead knowing you'll be at a disadvantage? Maybe you're headstrong enough to believe that that 50% boost doesn't matter and that you'll just circumvent the silence by not using mages or other skill dependent units on this map. Maybe you'll turn this map into an escort mission where you send a group of more tanky units along with the gunner to protect them while they take care of the geopanels. Or maybe you'll use a totally different strategy, and that's the magic of this system. There is no right or wrong path, just the one that you choose to walk and the consequences that come with it. There are dozens, and I mean dozens, of different applications for this system, and the developers got extremely creative with some of these stages. For spoiler reasons, I don't want to show too many, and I'll be vague about this next statement for that same reason, but there are well over 70 different stages in this game, and the developers created everything from a mini adventure game to a ping pong match to just a simple one-on-one fight against a terrifying galactic level threat disguised as a human. Now, the second thing Disgaea 7 does to set itself apart is deceptively simple. This is a mechanic that I didn't think twice about when I first learned of it, but something that I would later consider just as instrumental to my success as reloading in a shooter. It's such a simple action, but it means so much, and if this were the only change that separated Disgaea from something like Fire Emblem, the two games would play almost entirely differently because of it. That's it. This is the ability to throw units on the map. I did say it was deceptively simple, right? So why is this so important? Well, there are a few rules to remember when it comes to throwing. 1. Thrown allies cannot move upon landing if they've already moved that turn. However, the opposite is also true. If you throw an ally that has not yet moved, they can then move their full distance upon landing. 2. Throwing consumes the action of the thrower, but does not prevent them from moving after the throw so long as they didn't move before it. 3. A unit who has lifted another unit does not immediately have to throw them, and can be lifted by a third unit. Finally, 4. Monsters, there are two types of characters in this game, monsters and humans, have a variation of throw called Montoss. This will automatically throw a unit the max distance in whatever direction a monster is facing when the unit is thrown on top of them. And crucially, this does not count as an action for the monster. However, monsters lack the ability to lift, and by extension cannot create towers from multiple throws in a row like humans can, but they can still throw nearby allies. The biggest reason this system is so important can be found in one simple word: movement. If used correctly, a unit is not limited by their individual movement distance, but by your personal planning and how you placed your units throughout the map. You can use this system offensively to infiltrate deep into enemy lines, you can use it defensively to get a tank to just the right spot to protect a more vulnerable unit, or you can even use that more vulnerable unit's abilities, then throw them back so that they're no longer in harm's way. Going back to the geopanels from earlier, you could even lift an enemy that's on a geopanel and throw them off of it to remove their buffs. This system is all about using your own creativity and planning to your advantage to get all of your units exactly where you want them to be. It ensures that units with lower movement stats aren't held back by that restriction, while also giving a new role to units with higher movement. Positioning becomes far more important thanks to throwing too, and you'll constantly be thinking about where everyone should be placed to maximize how far you can throw your units if the need arises. It's a system that allows every single unit on the map to be useful at any moment regardless of their stats, since anyone can throw, and the ability to move an extra 4 or 5 spaces is never not going to be valuable. But where Disgaea really goes over the top and truly allows its vibrant personality to shine through is with Hell Mode and jumbification. Let's start with jumbification since it's a bit more simple. So this is a newer mechanic in the series. It allows a unit to turn massive and quite literally dominate the battlefield. Not only does jumbification massively increase a unit's stats, but it also unlocks an AoE attack that has access to any part of the stage at any time. A jumbified unit can have a huge influence on the tide of battle, as not only are they able to affect a large range anywhere on the field, but they also activate their jumbility, which is a special rule that affects everyone on the map. For example, Fuji's jumbility makes it so that any attack made by any unit will deal an extra 50% damage if done from behind. This affects both allies and enemies though, so you really do have to think about how you want to use it. A better example of this volatility is C4's jumbility, which lowers everyone's fire resistance by 99%. This can be great if you're using fire attacks, but you have to keep in mind that this affects you too. So if there are fire users nearby, it's probably a bad idea unless you have a way to end the fight right then and there. Enemies will take advantage of this system as well, often using it with their backs against the wall to turn the tables and create the perfect conditions for their own success. For example, I'm gonna have to heavily censor this story to avoid spoilers. Equally, the footage I show isn't going to be the fight I'm talking about for the exact same reason. Okay, let's get back to it. There was one stage late in the game that was effectively a hallway. It was about 3 spaces wide, and as a result, a ton of my units were bunched up together. There were even geo panels here that increased the enemy's defense and overall stats, along with recovering everyone's health every turn. Basically, it was a tank's paradise. I trudged my way through this grueling gauntlet, and when I was finally close enough to confront the boss, I began preparing with some buffs, when suddenly they activated jumbification and attacked about 6 of my 10 units, reducing their HP by anywhere from 40 to 80%. This was obviously quite a problem. To make matters worse, their jumbility reduced the damage from frontal attacks by 50%. This is an exceptional ability as you can't hit jumbified units from anywhere but the front. So now, with over half of my team on their last legs, another deadly AoE on the way, and absolutely no way to defeat the enemy in front of me, I went from comfortably preparing to end the fight on this very turn to scrambling in a desperate attempt to put the pieces back together and construct some kind of strategy to get me out of this mess. This all happened due to one single action taken by one single unit. Jumbification creates a setting where even if you're confident that you'll predict exactly what's going to happen next turn, everything can suddenly turn on its head and completely morph the situation into something far more dire at the drop of a hat. And to be honest with you, I absolutely love that. What initially seems like a silly gimmick is actually a solidly complex mechanic that has very real repercussions on the gameplay. Its chaotic nature perfectly fits with the over-the-top eccentric feel of this game, while also removing the more strict chess-like rules that are in place in favor of completely new guidelines that everyone is forced to follow. Yet, despite all of that, I still think it's only second to Hell Mode. I do not know of another way to describe some of the abilities granted by Hell Mode outside of the word broken. If you were to put any one of these abilities into a normal strategy RPG, it would completely break the game, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So Hell Mode itself you can think of kinda like a Super Saiyan-esque power-up for certain characters. It lasts for 3 turns and increases your stats while also granting you a new ability and what you could call an ultimate skill. The abilities could be anything from controlling every unit in a 5x5 radius to increasing your attack range by 32 panels, which is effectively just the entire stage, or even being able to make multiple moves in a single turn. These abilities are completely insane, and the fact that some of them act as passive abilities and not single-use skills is part of what makes them so overwhelmingly powerful. But some of the skills are arguably better than some of the abilities granted by Hell Mode. All of these skills are incredibly strong as you'd expect, but it's their attributes along with their power that make them so game-changing. Fuji's skill ignores enemy defense. This turns it into a delete exactly one enemy type of skill. Assuming levels are somewhat close and you've had the time to build Fuji into a more DPS heavy role, nothing is going to survive this. Another skill, again spoilers, sorry for being so vague, fully heals everyone in a 5x5 radius while also increasing all of their stats by 50% for 3 turns. Finally, there's the one I used the most by far, a laser beam that draws a straight line across the map, dealing damage to every single enemy in its path with infinite range. I think you get the idea and why I can't call some of these anything other than just broken. But believe it or not, the game is actually balanced around them. They're not just win buttons. Okay, sometimes they're just win buttons, but they're not always like that. See, using these skills instantly ends Hell Mode, along with all of its stat buffs and abilities, so there's a bit of a risk-reward with it. Regardless, Hell Mode is probably your single most powerful asset, and it creates some of the most over-the-top moments in the entire game. Okay, so remember that pyramid from earlier? Right now, we're probably somewhere around here, with this being the basics, and here being stuff like geopanels, Hell Mode, and jumbification. But now we need to move a little higher before we get to the top, so we can understand just what makes the peak itself so special. So you might remember that you can have 10 units out at any time in each stage. The game only gives you 6 units for free through the story, so where do the other 4 come from? Well, that's where the character recruiter comes in. This is my personal favorite part of the entire series due to the potential that comes with it. When you start the game, you have access to about 17 unique classes. If this was the total number of classes in the game, it'd still be pretty impressive. I mean, 17 classes along with 6 unique characters, that's 23 total units, all of which have their own goals, strengths, and weaknesses. But that's actually not even close to the total number. There are well over 40 unique classes in the game, and that's not even including the story characters. With this many options at your disposal, you can carefully craft a team that does exactly what you want it to do. Maybe you want a team of archers, gunners, and mages so that you never have to get close to your enemy, or maybe you just want a team of tanks to do the exact opposite. Maybe you're comfortable with your current team, but you'd like a bit more movement and utility, so you recruit a thief or a ninja. And maybe when you do, you find that the ninja's a bit too fragile, so you recruit an armor knight to act as a bodyguard for them. The options here are truly limitless. Even if you assume that every single person playing the game will just use the starting 6 along with only recruiting 4 characters, that still leaves you with 148,995 different combinations. And again, that's assuming you use all 6 story characters and stick with exactly one single team for the entire game. If we include the fact that you don't have to use story characters and instead add them to the pool of potential units, then we're looking at a total of 12,777,711,870. So while it's not technically limitless, the actual sun might burn out before you get the chance to use every single one. Now, as massive as that number is, it's really not even scratching the surface. And I know that might be hard to believe, so to understand how that's possible, let's zoom into the recruitment process of just one of the few dozen classes. So this guy is the warrior class. He's about as simple as it gets. When you hover over a class like this, you're gonna get a few details on them. For example, if we look here, we can see their stats. This is their basic stat spread. This guy's got high attack, low intelligence and resistance, and high HP. Pretty typical warrior class. Move a little to the right and we see his movement, his jump height, his range, his throw distance, the amount of counterattacks he's capable of doing, and finally his crit percentage. And just a bit further to the right you get his weapon mastery, which is just how good he is at using each of the weapons in the game. You can turn the page to get some more detailed stats and turn it again to see his unique ability. Abilities are just a fancy way of saying abilities. They're exactly the same, so you can think of them as such. This specific class has an ability that raises all of their stats by 10% for every unit that's next to them. So when you select this character, you get to name them, and then you get to choose their potential. This is just a place where you can allocate bonus stats to your character to get them closer to the role you want them to play. Importantly, these stat bonuses alter the growth rate to prioritize the stats that you increased. Next, you select their level, which can go about 80% of your highest leveled character, and finally you select their personality and color, both of which have no impact on gameplay, but they're still really important to me. Now, this isn't that complicated. In short, you choose a class, allocate their stats, level them up, give them a name, personality, and color, and you're done. So what exactly makes this system so special then? Well, this isn't the end of the road for customization. In fact, it's barely the beginning. For simplicity's sake, we'll stick with the same warrior from before. The question you have to ask yourself when you recruit a character is, what kind of role does my party need? For example, in my playthrough, I desperately needed a tank. I didn't really have a unit that I could just throw into a crowd to attract enemies, or a character to take the vanguard and protect my softer units like mages or more fragile DPS. So I recruited a female armor knight because of her ability, Hero's Shield. This allows her to take hits for adjacent units when she defends. This was the perfect class for my party since now I could safely put my more vulnerable units on the front lines without having to worry about them getting hurt. But for this warrior, we're gonna go for the opposite. I want a DPS, a unit that hits things very hard. Now, weapon choice may seem arbitrary since swords, spears, and axes all have the same mastery for this class, however, that couldn't be further from the truth. Different weapons take different stats into account when calculating damage. Guns, for example, aren't based on strength. This kinda makes sense considering all you're doing is pulling the trigger, so instead they scale based on your accuracy and speed stats. For a gunner to deal the most damage, you want to make them as fast as you can while also increasing their hit rate. Because of this, these weapons also grant different stat bonuses. It wouldn't really make sense for guns to scale based on speed only for every gun in the game to only boost your attack, right? So let's look at the 3 options available to us and their strengths and weaknesses. Lucky for us, all 3 of these weapons scale based on attack, so we don't have to take that into consideration, but they do have different specialties. The Humble Sword increases your attack and nothing else. It's a simple weapon with a simple goal: deal damage. The Spear focuses on a more tank-heavy role. It's got more reach than the Sword and the Axe, with an attack range of 2 instead of 1. It also grants the user a boost to their defense at the cost of some attack. Finally, we've got the Axe, an all-out attack type of weapon that actually lowers your speed and hit rate for a massive increase to your raw damage. So we've got a consistent damage option, one one that focuses on defense and range, and a high risk, high reward pure damage option. I did say I wanted DPS, but let's tone it down a bit and go with consistency, because missing would make me shut the game off and touch grass for the first time this month. Wait, maybe that wouldn't be so bad. Now that we've got a character and weapon, we can give them some armor and some stat boosting equipment and we'll be good to go, for now at least. So the sword comes with some skills like every weapon in the game. You can think of these as special attacks with a variety of different effects outside of just deal more damage than a normal attack. They've got range, they've got area of effect damage, they can debuff your enemy, move you to a different panel after the attack, you get the idea. These skills can be leveled up at the skill shop, but you do have to be careful, especially early game, as these upgrades in power also come with increases in SP usage. I'm gonna assume you've played a video game before, but in case you haven't, SP stands for skill points, and each skill costs a certain amount. You've got to be careful with these upgrades because their cost can increase exponentially. One level might cost 1/10 of your SP, and the next may deplete your entire reserves. Luckily, you can roll these back free of charge if you accidentally upgrade too many times, but you won't get your mana back when you do. Mana is a different resource that I'll explain in a second. For now, just know that as you level your main character and increase your weapon mastery by using said weapon, you get to unlock these new skills that you can then choose to upgrade based on how much you value your damage and your resources. So that's it. You recruit a character, give them a weapon, learn some skills, upgrade them at your discretion, and you're done. Not quite. Remember the abilities from earlier? Well, each character isn't just limited to one. You've got this bar that you can fill up with common abilities. Every character has their own unique ability, but common ones can be shared between characters and grant bonus passive effects. Some are simple, like increased growth rates of certain stats, but some are much more in depth. The armor knight I was talking about before gets a skill called Hold the Line, which prevents enemies from passing her immediate left and right when she's defending. This is great when you want to effectively put up a wall to protect your more vulnerable units. Each common ability takes up some space, so you can only equip a few of them at a time. These can also be unlocked with mana, and once unlocked can be equipped freely whenever you want, or even turned into scrolls and copied to a different character. I really love this system as it allows you to weigh your options and decide what abilities you want your character to have based on what your idea of their role is supposed to be. So even if I'm using the same warrior with the same sword, the same skills, the same upgrade levels, and even the same stat allocations, my warrior might still play differently from yours because of our choices on what abilities we wanted to use. And now, finally, that's it. So from the top, you recruit a character, choose their stat allocation, make some cosmetic decisions, select their weapon, get them some top of the line armor, upgrade their skills, and finally select the abilities you want them to use. You do this for all 10 characters on your team and create this brilliantly cohesive unit that almost feels like a single character. There was this moment a little more than halfway through the game where I got a very similar feeling to what I experienced when playing card games or fighting games. This feeling of knowing all of your options and knowing exactly how to best utilize them. You chose this team, you built all of these characters almost from scratch, and in doing so you got to know each and every one of them to an extreme degree of precision and clarity. You'll have moments where you're backed into a corner, your resources are low and your health is even lower, when suddenly you'll remember a small detail from one of your 10 units and begin to concoct a plan that would only work with your team. These plans you can create feel so personal and real because you were only able to create them because of your knowledge and understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of every member of your party. Okay, so I did kinda skim over the whole do this 10 times thing, and I get it, it's overwhelming to say the least. When I started playing Disgaea, I thought the exact same thing. To make matters worse, you may be wondering when all of this happens. I mean, do you recruit a character and just go through over half an hour of customization just to make them usable? Let's address that, along with the elephant in the room: grinding. Grinding in Disgaea is kinda like Michael Jordan in basketball, or toast and bread, or YouTube video essays and desperate pleas for subs. These pairs are intrinsically linked, and it's hard to imagine one without the other. You unlock a lot of classes through grinding, you acquire skills and abilities through grinding, you master weapons and upgrade skills through grinding. There are even smaller aspects of the game like innocence, these silly little guys who live inside your items, don't think about it too much, and pretty significantly increase your stats that require grinding too. To a lot of people, myself included, if you told me this about any game, it'd likely be a death sentence. I probably wouldn't pick it up, and I'd just move on to another game that actually respects my time. But Disgaea 7 is different. See, there are 3 types of games: those that don't have any grinding at all, those that require grinding to progress, and finally those that use grinding as a tool to improve the experience. Hear me out. Mana is effectively a secondary resource to EXP that you spend to unlock abilities and enhance your skills. You gain mana from defeating enemies, but you also get it from completing stages. This bonus mana adds up. It's sort of a set it and forget it type of thing. It goes to the juice bar, a place where you can give these bonus mana points to any character you want, including characters you've just recruited. But that's that's not enough. This bonus mana doesn't account for weapon mastery to unlock skills, or class mastery to unlock new abilities, or even just pure level ups. And while sure, EXP is stored at the juice bar too, it's not that much, certainly not enough to level an entire team of 10. This is where the cheat shop comes in. The cheat shop is something you can unlock pretty early on and is totally game changing, literally. In it, you can adjust the rate at which you obtain certain resources like mana or EXP. This is balanced by the fact that for every percentage point you raise one resource, you must lower another by the same amount. So if I want 50% more EXP, I'd have to lower 50 collective points for mana, money, weapon mastery, skill EXP, and class proficiency. Crucially, however, you get to choose what you want to lower and by how much, just as long as it all adds up to 50 total. So with that 50% EXP boost, you'd only have to lower each aspect by 10%. But if you instead didn't care about money, for example, you could just drop that by 50 and touch nothing else. The developers weren't satisfied with just that though. Changing the parameters would still force you to replay old stages, even if you'd end up going through them far less. So this is where the developers deliver their knockout punch, their masterstroke, the item world, a procedurally generated endless dungeon with enemies that are more than twice your level with less than half of your stats. And of course, these enemies give rewards based on their levels. So your healer can one-shot an enemy 50 levels higher than her, level up 5 times in a row from that one kill, gain more than enough mana and weapon mastery to unlock some new abilities and skills, and simply move on with her life without a second thought. Okay, then why? Why bother adding all of these mechanics when you can totally trivialize them with just a bit of knowledge on how the game works in just the first dozen hours? This is where we reach the peak of the pyramid. This is where it all starts to make sense. The team building, the parameter changes, the endless grinding and mechanics, the character creator, all of it comes together to create an ideal experience that you can perfectly tailor to your own personal specifications. Let me tell you a story. When I started playing this game, I would occasionally use jumbification to grind by allowing one weaker unit to clear a crowd of enemies and gain EXP from all of them. This was a great way to level up extremely fast, but it was a little too great. See, I didn't realize how high the levels of the enemies I was fighting in the item world were, and I accidentally went up about 10 levels higher than I intended to, which as an aside should go to show just how fast and easily you can grind in this game. Anyway, I was seriously worried that I'd have to reload an old save because I didn't want to trivialize the game. I wanted to be a bit stronger, sure, but I didn't want to remove the difficulty altogether because I was 10 levels higher than I was supposed to be. As a last-ditch effort, I went to the cheat shop to see if I could maybe raise the difficulty a bit. It was here that I found not 1, not 3 or 5 or 7 levels of difficulty, but 20 of them. This is completely excessive. I wasn't complaining though, I upped the difficulty a bit and suddenly my mistake of over-leveling was swept under the rug and totally forgotten. I spent the entire game doing this, moving the slider up and down depending on how challenging the enemies were and how challenging I wanted them to be. I spent time in the item world to build and mold the perfect team with perfect abilities and perfect skills. I then upgraded those skills exactly as much as I wanted, keeping some as more consistent options while upgrading others to be so powerful that I could only use them once or twice as an ace up my sleeve. I took advantage of the innocent system later on to gain tremendous stat bonuses, and most importantly, I could have ignored it all. I didn't have to do anything that I did in this game to beat it. I only ever did what I wanted to do. I only ever fought enemies at a difficulty level I wanted them to be at. I only ever grinded as much as I wanted to grind, and not a second longer. You see, when you take all of these systems and blend them together, you change what was at a glance an overwhelming and convoluted array of seemingly endless mechanics into an ocean of possibilities limited only by your own will to shape it.
You've activated my trap tile. Red Eye says just I.
No! Everything on the field was destroyed!
That's not how you play Mahjong!
So one of my favorite parts of Disgaea 7 is its ability to be what is effectively a parody game without completely sacrificing its writing and story. There's some excellent writing in this game, and there's just as much comically stupid nonsense as there are serious and meaningful narrative moments. I'm thoroughly stunned by the fact that this very same game that was parodying Yu-Gi-Oh! Halfway through also had me ruminating on certain moments for days and weeks after they happened. I was not expecting a good story here, nor did I think the characters would be anything more than simple archetypes played off for jokes and cheap laughs, but I was both pleasantly surprised and thoroughly stunned at what this game was able to convey while never once forgetting its one-of-a-kind personality. So here's how spoilers are going to work. The upcoming section will highlight 3 chapters in the game, 1 from earlier on and 2 from mid to late game in that order. I really do think this story is a joy to experience, and as great as I am, I still think it would be significantly more fun to play the game and experience that story yourself as opposed to having someone explain its high points to you and what makes it so wonderful. I'll still try to be relatively light on spoilers outside of these chapters if I can, so that you can still get an idea of the writing and narrative without the entire game being spoiled, but to be honest, if you plan to play this game, you need to run. This place isn't safe for you anymore. Just press the eject button, don't worry about what it says, it's mislabeled, and go play the game yourself. I hope you enjoy it. If you've already played the game or simply don't care about spoilers, then you can stick around. I'll start with a quick synopsis for that second group. So the game takes place in the Netherworlds, which you could kind of think of as the underworld. All of the people here are actually demons, so I'll use both terms interchangeably. However, despite being in the underworld, this feels more like a galactic adventure since each chapter takes place on a different world and you travel between worlds on what is effectively a spaceship. The cluster of worlds we're currently in is called Hinamoto. It's basically Japan. They're not exactly subtle about this fact either. Regardless, these are our dual protagonists, Fuji and Peerless. The former is a disillusioned warrior from Hinamoto with lots of debt, and the latter is described as a Hinamoto otaku. If you want a better understanding of what that is, just go to a nearby bathroom and there's a 50% chance that you'll see one when you look in the mirror. This duo is... Who am I kidding? I've got an entire Spotify playlist from Japanese VTubers. I've got no ground to stand on here. Whatever, this duo creates a fun and immediate contrast. One person who's obsessed with Hinamoto, honor, and Bushido, and another who sucker punches their opponent in the very first scene of the game. This juxtaposition is pretty obvious. They only joined forces because Peerless is rich and Fuji's in debt. The latter also signs a contract without reading it. Recently, an evil guy named Demodor Opener arrived at the Hinamoto Netherworlds and took over, uniting all of the Netherworlds under his rule and taking his place at the top of the shogunate. The shogunate is effectively the government. Peerless wants to stop him by obtaining 7 super weapons called the 7 Founding Weapons, often called Infernal Treasures, and restore Bushido to Hinamoto. Now there are still some important terms that'll come up, but I'll just explain them when they do since I think going down a list of definitions would be pretty boring. That's pretty much all the necessary context for now, so let's get started with the chapters.
Episode 5. Something harder to see than the future.
Chapter 5 begins with the party in a situation that a lot of us can probably relate to. They're broke. Some of them have spent too much money on games from not Amazon, and some of them just eat far too much, but it doesn't actually matter. The reality is the same. They're out of cash. It's here that they have a brilliant idea. With a massive casino world recently reopening, they decide to go there and spend the very last of their money in hopes of winning big. Listen, I don't think I have to say this, but please do not ever do this. The premise of this chapter is pretty dumb, and when I say that, I don't mean the writing is bad, quite the opposite actually. This is a plan so stupid that only a party made up of these specific characters could possibly commit to this type of idea. Fuji's a wandering warrior with more debt than morality, so of course he'd be okay with gambling. Peerless obsessed with everything Hinamoto, so she's just excited to see more of it. Ieyasu is a stupid rich kid who's unable to think about anything but women and partying, so he fits the bill. C4 is a thief who probably thinks she can just cheat better than the casino will. And Higan, well, we learn she has other ideas. So again, this is a plan that's really dumb from a logical perspective, but makes perfect sense from a narrative one. Upon arriving at the casino, they're reminded that they're currently wanted fugitives, and it's here that C4 reveals that she has a plan for this. She's got exorbitantly expensive printy disguises. This turns out to be a great investment, as thanks to these disguises, the party is able to not only avoid confrontation, but even meet with the boss of the casino, the magistrate Yayaka. There are 13 magistrates, and they all work directly under Demodor Opener. Each one has a terrifying amount of power both physically in their abilities and politically in the shogunate. Some of them boast the most powerful armor in all of Hinamoto, some are capable of predicting the future, and some even possess the ability to create super weapons destructive enough to level an entire city. Naturally, of course, this magistrate earns her title with her unmatched ability to gamble. She's the gambling magistrate. Okay, so they're not all Avengers level threats. Yayaka graciously gifts the party $1 million in chips, which is surely not a trap. She then tells them to go have some fun and leaves them to their own devices. They quickly lose all of the money granted to them because shockingly, the casino run by demons cheated. Ieyasu, Peerless, and Fuji lament their inability to win big when Higan proudly shows up claiming that she knew this would happen. Ieyasu, relieved that at least someone was able to win, asks her for some of her chips, to which she says,
"Huh? I took all my chips and immediately cashed them in for sweets. I don't have a single one left."
Which, to be fair, is probably the right choice. As if things weren't bad enough already, Yayaka comes back and reminds the party that she wasn't gifting them 1 million in chips, she was loaning them. With no way to pay her back, the party is forced to fight other demons who have met a similar fate. However, one of the party members is missing. C4 is nowhere to be found. She returns shortly after the fight and reveals that she's been able to double her money, likely with a bit of counter cheating of course, but also with her ability to see into a person's soul. This will be important in a second, so keep it in mind. Yayaka appears and C4 challenges her directly to a game of poker. Naturally, Yayaka, being the gambling magistrate going up against what she thinks is a funny looking penguin, happily accepts. Embarrassingly, she loses at poker in her own casino to that funny looking penguin while holding the title of gambling magistrate, which is just a generational L, and she responds accordingly, totally losing her composure. She reveals that she grew up poor on Sardine World, the world from the previous chapter, and that now that she's at the top, she's not going to lose it all to a prinny. She challenges C4 to her best game, Demon Shogi. It's here that the game does something that I was pleasantly surprised by. When this scene ends and the battle begins, it's not just a normal fight, you're actually playing Demon Shogi now. You've got 5 prinnies on your side and are only allowed to deploy 5 units in this fight. Your opponent Yayaka also has 4 prinnies along with 6 normal units. And there's just something exciting and fresh about being presented a stage that's so starkly different from what you've done up to this point in the chapter. It's strangely enjoyable to make the most of what are, quite frankly, borderline useless units. Interestingly, this stage actually acts like a tutorial for the much more demanding version of this game that you'll have to play next time. For now, the gambling magistrate loses once again and reveals her tragic backstory. She abandoned her friends, her home, and even her feelings to get the power that she has now. This is likely why she's so desperate to win here. She wants to prove, perhaps even to herself, that the decisions and sacrifices she made were worth it, that she chose the right path. She claims that she had to cut ties with her home and that she doesn't care that she did it. She even insults the people living there almost as if she's trying to convince herself that they mean nothing to her. But C4 reads her soul and calls out her lies. She explains that even though Yayaka made some mistakes and chose the wrong path, she can still go back and make things right. She doesn't have to force herself to be alone just because she made the wrong decision. C4 understands this idea especially well, as in the previous chapter she tried to work alone but wasn't able to accomplish her goals until she accepted the help of the party. Yayaka accepts that she lost and begrudgingly leaves the party alone, likely accepting, at least partially, that C4 is right. Suisen, the foreseeing magistrate, shows up and effectively exists to reinforce this idea that people are stronger together than they are alone. In a scene straight out of Naruto, the party struggles against Suisen's ability to predict all of their attacks. C4 even starts to lose hope when Higan and the others are able to convince her to stand and fight together against Suisen despite his overwhelming advantages. The party is successful and Suisen is amazed at the power of friendship. It warms his cold machine heart and he wishes to learn more about it, so he joins the party. Now, if we rewind a bit, we can see one small problem here. The party never made enough money. They adopted Suisen and left the gambling world, so how did they address that problem? Well, after talking a bit on the ship, they realized that Higan isn't there. Turns out she stayed behind and practically threatened the casino until they gave her enough money to solve the party's financial issues. This is simply a comical solution to a comical problem. Chapter 5 is pretty obviously about loneliness and companionship, but it also hints at a larger theme that we'll see much more of later in the game: apathy as a solution to suffering. This is an extremely interesting idea, and I love how the game discusses it. We'll talk more about it later. Despite that, this is quite possibly the least serious chapter in the game, and that's part of why I chose to highlight it. It's a perfect example of how even when this game is at its silliest, with battlefields that emulate a board game and our main cast running into and partially causing ridiculous problems that only they could, there are still some, admittedly surface level, themes and ideas that are worth paying attention to. Now, from this point forward, there are going to be some pretty sizable spoilers, so consider this your final warning.
Episode 7. Welcome to Garo Hot Springs.
If you had a scale that measured how serious a chapter was, Chapter 5 would be somewhere around here. Chapter 7, on the other hand, might cause the scale to break due to the sheer range on display. This chapter is where we learn a bit about Fuji's past and who he really is, along with a powerful message about identity, but it's also where we meet the ping pong magistrate. It jumps between the two ends of the spectrum so masterfully, and it does so with full and absolute confidence in both. So let's set the stage. The party receives a letter from the shogunate congratulating them on collecting so many of the founding weapons. They're invited to Garo Haunt Springs to celebrate. Fortunately, as the letter says,
Also, don't worry, this is definitely not a trap.
The entire party, with the exception of Peerless, recognizes that this is obviously a trap, but because of her persistence and Higan's sweet tooth, they decide to go. So this is another one of those there is absolutely no reason we should be in this situation chapters, where no group of sane individuals would ever put themselves in a position like this. The letter only works because of who they sent it to. Just before they set off to the Haunt Springs though, the mood is interrupted. Higan, in a much more more serious tone than usual, confronts Fuji, asking him if he's gonna be okay, to which he says he'll be fine. This stands in stark contrast to everything else that just happened and begins to set the tone for the rest of this chapter. It's gonna be silly, it always is, but Fuji has a history here. Higan might too, considering that she's the one who asked him about it. If nothing else, this moment serves to show us that there's something more going on here below the surface, and soon we'll find out exactly what. This chapter acts as a magistrate gauntlet where you rematch the old magistrates and encounter some new faces too. Some fight alone and some challenge you in pairs, but they're all taken about as seriously as you'd expect. The invincible protection magistrate Big Bull is quickly defeated by Higan because he failed to put armor in a more essential area, but he's just happy she knows his name. He's a big fan. Our friend Yayaka is back, along with the idol magistrate Sakura. They're quickly defeated as well, and while they're upset that they were demoted due to their previous losses, you can tell their hearts aren't as hardened as they were before. This is evidenced by the fact that they stop fighting the party after a young orphan runs up to them and asks them to play some games. There are two great lines here which I just want to share because I think they're hilarious and the delivery from the voice actors was brilliant. One from Yayaka, who laments the orphan density in this area.
So many dang orphans round these parts!
And another from Peerless, who says,
I guess demons, even those working for the government, can show empathy after all.
Which just sounds like the last line in a sitcom where the main cast finds out that not all demons are bad guys or something. Anyway, it's actually right after these lines that things start to get a bit more serious again. Peerless claims that Fuji's got a kind heart too, and this causes a flashback where he remembers his mother and responds to Peerless by saying,
like hell, I've never been nice,
in the most brooding and mysterious way he can. And then we play some ping pong. This is actually one of my favorite stages in the game, despite the fact that I beat it in one single turn with just one attack. The ping pong magistrate Akuma, yes, he's a demon named Demon, challenges us to a game of life-sized ping pong. There are bomb barrels all over the map and a massive wall separating the two sides of the table? Would it be a court now that it's this big? I don't know, it doesn't matter. You can totally ignore these rules. In fact, the game almost nudges you in that direction with a magic range up geo panel that allows you to hit the ping pong magistrate on the first turn. In the following cutscene, Akuma challenges Fuji to a normal game of ping pong in which he loses again. He remarks that Fuji must be from here if he's this good at ping pong, and this triggers another flashback because Fuji is from here. He recalls playing ping pong with Seigen and Benikage, his old fellow students. He states that this place has nothing but bad memories and regrets coming here when suddenly the man from his memories, Seigen, shows up. The two exchange some words and it's revealed by Seigen that Mugai, Fuji, Benikage, and Seigen's old master, was actually Fuji's father. This is a shock to everyone in the party besides Higan and obviously Fuji. C brushes the surprised reactions aside and reminds Fuji that his father Mugai was killed by Demodor Opener and that no one can beat him, so fighting against him is pointless. He even offers Fuji a place by his side under Opener. Fuji then responds with my single favorite line in the game up to this point.
Better a stray than a shogunate lapdog.
This line is so powerful because Fuji is effectively saying that in spite of all of his debt, all of his challenges, and all of his struggles, he'd rather have nothing than join Seigen and Opener. This touches on the themes of identity as well, since this line could be rewritten as, I'd rather have nothing and be who I am than have everything and be something I'm not. That's how strong Fuji's sense of identity is. So after Seigen becomes Lose Again, he gets pretty frustrated. He can't understand why he lost, and Fuji reinforces the whole identity thing here by saying that before he joined the shogunate, he was stronger than this. By losing his identity and forsaking who he was in a vain pursuit of power, he accomplished nothing. This is yet another moment where the game hints at one of its larger themes without going too in depth just yet. Finally, the party tries to enter the Haunt Springs but are stopped one last time by the second to last magistrate of this chapter, Yubana, the Haunt Springs magistrate. She's just upset that her trap didn't work and now won't let the party enjoy the Haunt Springs out of pure pettiness. They're able to defeat her when suddenly they're confronted by another one of Fuji's old classmates, Benikage, or as he's calling himself now, Ultimate Crimson Dark. Peerless messes up his name by calling him Helmet Crimson Dark, to which he responds,
I'm not named after an extremely vital piece of equipment that reduces crash fatalities by 80%.
C4 replaces the Ultimate with Marionette, which is at least a bit more accurate considering he's a puppet of the shogunate, but Higan completely butchers it.
Let's go, alphabet question mark!
And as comical as this entire interaction is, it does raise a point that I think is worth appreciating. This game has a lot of clever wordplay like this. It comes up frequently in cutscenes and it's all over the item descriptions. One sword is called Zweihander and it reads, Zweihander, I hardly even know her, which is such a stupid joke, but it's not something that you're ever gonna get from a pure one-to-one translation. You can really tell that the translators had a lot of fun with this script, and as a result, you get a lot of moments like this throughout the game. Anyway, linguistic tangent aside, the chapter ends with Ao, Fuji's daughter, don't worry about that right now, destroying the haunt springs and warning the party of an event going on elsewhere. This chapter should not have happened. I mean, from a logical standpoint, the party shouldn't even be here. This is clearly a trap, and they knew as much. This chapter is filled with characters who either aren't even remotely threatening like the ping pong magistrate, or ones who aren't really taking this situation seriously like Sakura, who need to be reminded to lock in by Yubana. This entire chapter is fundamentally ridiculous, and yet there's still a lot of noteworthy stuff going on here. This is Fuji's homeworld, and he's got a lot of painful memories regarding it, but just look at how they choose to cover that, starting with just a single brief exchange between Higan and Fuji to establish the idea that there's more going on here, a short flashback with his mother right after the second stage, a longer flashback after the third, and finally see again his former classmate arriving in the fourth to fully divulge large parts of Fuji's past. Importantly, however, they hold on to that same restraint from the very start of the chapter. This isn't Fuji's chapter. This is a wacky expedition into what is obviously a trap in search of some hot springs and dumplings. It just so happens that Fuji has some history here, but the game doesn't make it this black and white thing where the first half of the chapter is a joke and the second suddenly blindsides you with this emotional journey about our character's past. The change from silly to serious happens so gradually and deliberately that neither aspect of the chapter feels out of place. I mean, even the flashback caused by the ping pong magistrate makes sense, since Fuji used to play ping pong with his fellow students, claiming that all there is to do on this world is train and play ping pong. As silly as it is, that's a very real part of his character, and so it doesn't feel out of place when this event triggers memories of his past. The game is brilliant at doing this, and I think Chapter 7 is one of the best representations of the extraordinarily flexible range of emotions that it's capable of displaying.
Episode 9. The Truth of the Infernal Treasures.
Chapter 9 starts with a premonition from Suisen. He gathers the party with the exception of Ieyasu to discuss an important matter. He says that Ieyasu is going to die. This is a bit of a shock considering he just had a chapter centered around him and his development, but a lot of the party doesn't see it that way. With the exception of Suisen and Peerless, they don't really care. Fuji explicitly says as much, C4 says that she'll help, but jokes, at least I hope this is a joke, that if an explosion kills him, she's not gonna stop it, and lastly, Higan is impartial but excited at the prospect of fighting fate, so she agrees to help if only because she thinks it'll be a fun challenge. I love that we get this concerning revelation that's starkly contrasted by the party's reaction to it. I mean, keep in mind, this happens right after a chapter entirely dedicated to Ieyasu and his backstory. In that same chapter, Ieyasu develops in such a way that I genuinely grew attached to him, and I'd imagine that'll be the case for most people playing this game. So for the party to then turn around and make jokes or just flat out say that they don't care allows the game to maintain this lighthearted, whimsical feel despite a very serious threat. There are three crucial aspects that make this scene work though. First, we have Peerless and Suisen. These two act almost as grounding characters to remind the player that no, you're not crazy for wanting Ieyasu to live. It's not like the entire party doesn't care, and in them having these reactions, it gives the player someone to relate to and connect with so that they don't feel left out. It would be really weird to have all of this development only for the entire party to go, yeah, whatever, let him die, who cares? Because then, in a way, as the player, you feel like you're missing something, like there's something they just inherently understand that you do not. The second reason this scene works so well is because, despite the party's nonchalant attitude towards the situation, they do still clearly care, even if they're being a bit discourteous about it. Higan and C4 directly say that they'll help save Ieyasu. In fact, Fuji is the only character that doesn't explicitly say that he'll help. However, he's still not necessarily against it, with his exact words being,
I don't know if I want to go through all that trouble for Shogun Stupid. He can croak for all I care.
So while he's not jumping to the rescue, he seems more like he truly just doesn't care. And the fact that Fuji has the most negative reaction to saving Ieyasu's life is actually going to be important later in this chapter, so keep it in mind. Finally, the third reason this scene works is because intention was established before the jokes really start coming in. We know the party will help save Ieyasu before he shows up, and they start saying things like,
You really want to save that guy?
Yeah, maybe fate's fate, you know?
I could kill him now if you want.
These jokes don't feel out of place because we know how the party truly feels. The context has already been established, so Higan offering to expedite the process isn't shocking or confusing, it's just funny. After some paranoia from Suisen causing him to destroy a natural landmark and a second vision showing that he will be the one to kill Ieyasu, we get our first of many big reveals in this chapter. Just before the party is able to enter the hideout that a bunch of the kidnapped people from Iudo, Ieyasu's home, are supposed to be located, they're confronted by another Suisen. C4 deduces that this must be a mass-produced version of their mechanical companion, and to this, Suisen worries a bit. He says,
A mass-produced version?
What does that make me?
And it's here that we again start to touch on the theme of identity, with a bit of free will sprinkled in too. Suisen is concerned that if these mass-produced versions of him are just machines following orders, how does he know that he's not one too? This is a pretty scary question, but it's when the party enters the hideout that things really get dark. We find out that Suisen, along with his clone and all infernal treasures, are made up of souls that were obtained from random innocent demons. The demons the party came here to save are already gone, their bodies discarded and their souls sacrificed to create living weapons. To make matters worse, we find out that one of the souls used to create Suisen is that of Ieyasu's younger brother, Iki. This is where Suisen's free will once again comes into question. He's so attached to Ieyasu because part of his soul is Ieyasu's brother, so naturally this raises the question, who is Suisen? We don't get much time to consider this as Kurofune, the ultimate version of Suisen's design, arrives and demonstrates its power by killing Ieyasu. This is why Suisen thought that he was the one who killed Ieyasu. He saw a silhouette and that silhouette was Kurofune. But at the very last moment, it's revealed that Suisen jumped in front of the blast, shielding and saving Ieyasu. Maybe this is because Ieyasu is his friend, maybe it's because he houses the soul of his younger brother, or maybe it's something entirely different. All we know is that this is the decision Suisen chose to make. This sacrifice reminds Fuji of what happened to his mother. She too sacrificed herself to save him. He steps forward and claims that he can save Suisen, but it's gonna cost them a lot of money to do so. Now, remember what I said about Fuji's initial reaction to Ieyasu's death? Remember how he was the only one who wasn't really willing to help? This is why. It's here that we get another massive reveal. Up until this point in the game, there's been a running gag about Fuji being allergic to empathy. Anytime he sees excessive kindness, empathy, or love, he starts vomiting blood. I, like the rest of the party, with the exception of Higan, believed that this wasn't anything serious. I thought it was just a bit to show how disgusted Fuji is by empathy and how dishonorable he is. I mean, in his very first appearance, you see him sucker punching his opponent. So the idea that Fuji's empathy allergy was just a joke to further emphasize that part of his character made a lot of sense. However, it's here that we learn it's far more serious. This isn't an allergy, it's a curse. When Fuji feels empathy, kindness, love, or any positive emotions of the sort, it genuinely harms him. To quote Higan,
"Unless he lives without empathy, he'll die."
I love how this recontextualizes large parts of the story. Fuji does this all the time, constantly coughing up blood at the slightest hint of empathy, but knowing that this only happens when he feels those emotions reveals that beyond that bitter exterior, he really is a nice guy. When he sees people being kind to each other, he feels something, and that's why he starts vomiting blood. A few characters mention this idea much later, but this quirk of Fuji's is effectively a way to tell how he truly feels about a situation. But it goes so much deeper than that, and when we get to Fuji's character as a whole, we'll see why. Earlier I mentioned that we don't know exactly what compelled Suisen to save Ieyasu, but it's here that an answer comes from an unlikely party. Perilika recalls a quote from her father.
Conviction is what makes you, you.
She usually screws up expressions and phrases, but she hit the nail right on the head with this one. It may sound simple on the surface, but the idea is that your values and your will to pursue and protect them define you. You're not defined by your circumstances, your background, or even your family. No, you're defined by your conviction and how it affects the world around you. This idea is especially important for certain characters in the party, one of them being Suisen, who grows especially attached to this concept. It gives him a much needed power-up that he, along with the rest of the party, used to defeat Kurofune once and for all. Not only is this the darkest chapter yet, but it also introduces some new ideas while going more in depth on others. It stands as a brilliant contrast that really demonstrates just how far this game is willing to go to convey its message and tell an impactful story. Alright, so for all 2 people who care about spoilers but are still here, I am going to spoil the entire game. Humans are inherently complex creatures. Each and every one of us acts in a certain way because of the context of our lives. I think what impresses me so much about the characters of Disgaea 7 is how each one of them adheres to this idea. Their traits and characteristics aren't merely one-dimensional jokes and bits, but are instead fundamental aspects of who they are that exist solely because of what they've experienced or how they feel. There is no single better example of this than Ieyasu. I did not like this character. In fact, that's a bit of an understatement considering when you look at my notes, I wrote, "And I get that that's his character, but I'm kinda just hoping there's more to him than being the most awful human alive." Let's just say I wasn't exactly his biggest fan, and in my defense, up until a certain point in the story, while Ieyasu did have very, very brief moments of slight usefulness, he had far more where even listening to him speak or watching how he behaved was a genuinely challenging test of patience. His introduction was gross to say the least. He was the definition of a loser, constantly chasing women, flaking at the slightest hint of adversity, and entirely unable to commit to anything other than immediate pleasure and instant gratification. Despite his profound incompetence, he he still somehow deluded himself into believing that he was the greatest being under the sun. Worst of all, he's supposed to be a shogun, the leader of his people, the one man who holds more responsibility than any other single individual in the world. And yet, instead of even pretending to care about those responsibilities, he spends his days partying, playing video games, and hiring women to spend time with whenever he can. Quick disclaimer, it's pretty heavily implied multiple times that Ieyasu is only interested in romantic relationships and not more physical ones. He's a weirdo and a loser, not a criminal, and if he was, there's no sad backstory that would ever make that justifiable. Just had to clear that up. Hold on a second, Editor Kevin here. So for this bit, I threw together a few lines on screen to show that he's interested in innocent romance and not more physical stuff, and that he's not a criminal, which, based on the information provided in the game, is still mostly true. However, in searching for these lines, I found some other lines like this, and this, some of which are genuine crimes, and leaving those out felt kinda dishonest. He's still a super well written character, but he's also a creep and arguably just an actual criminal. Okay, I promise that's it. I just felt really weird not including all the details. I could keep going, but I think Perillica's initial reaction sums it up much better than I ever could.
Speechless from the sheer emotion?
I think dumbfounded with disgust is more accurate.
A lesser game would have this as his entire character. He'd simply be comic relief and nothing more. But like I said, in Disgaea 7, people are the way they are for a reason, and Ieyasu's is shockingly good. So when Demidor Opener invaded Hinamoto, Ieyasu begged his father, the previous shogun, to allow him to take the responsibility of handling diplomatic relations with Opener. This may sound crazy at first, but Ieyasu was actually considered by the people to be the best successor in history. People were excited for when he would become shogun because they believed he would be even better than his father was. To say Ieyasu was loved by his people would barely convey just how much they cared about him. He wasn't just great, he was the loved so much by the people that if he died there would be a revolt type of leader. Equally, he directly led the counterattack when Opener invaded, so him being chosen to handle relations made sense, and he did a good job. Things were going well at first, however, one day Opener suddenly changed. He kidnapped Iki, Ieyasu's younger brother, with the help of Ieyasu's cousin, Party-Yasu, and forced him to surrender. Upon doing so, he then executed Ieyasu's father, presumably because he considered him a threat. He then instituted a puppet government with Ieyasu as the new shogun. With his brother kidnapped, his father dead, and his power effectively removed, Ieyasu gave up. He realized that he was in a hopeless situation. He failed to save his family, he was no longer able to help his people, and he was entirely incapable of stopping Opener alone.
I couldn't do anything about it. So I turned my back on reality and partied my days away.
Ieyasu's not a vile, irredeemable waste of life like I thought he was. He's just a depressed and broken man with no hope left. He's scared of losing anything more than he already has, so he lives life on autopilot and hides from reality by drowning himself in meaningless pleasures.
I don't want to lose anything else!
To be honest, it's kinda hard to blame him. However, Fuji has an outstanding line in response to Ieyasu's confession. He says,
Not doing anything isn't the same as protecting something. The world around you will still change. You'll just get left behind.
He's effectively saying that burying your problems and hiding from reality out of fear isn't a solution. It may feel good in the moment, but it's not actually going to help you or accomplish anything. This is a tough pill to swallow, but he's right. Considering his circumstances, you could understand why Ieyasu would give up, but that doesn't make it okay. While his traumatic past recontextualizes his actions, it doesn't justify them. It's still his responsibility to move forward, and with the help of the party, he's finally able to face that pain and fear and do just that. He steals his resolve, and the soul within his infernal treasure, Tokugawa Tenge, recognizes this, lending him its full power. With the power to control those around him, he gives his backstabbing cousin an order.
Party-Yasu, this is an order from the Shogun! Come at me with everything you've got! I'll crush you head on!
The music, the voice acting, and the stellar artwork are all topped off with this line where even with full control over what his cousin is able to do, he orders him to fight, almost as if to directly demonstrate that from this point forwards, he'll face his problems head on. Suisen is a living weapon that carries out the orders of the shogunate. He only joins the party out of both curiosity and obligation, as he's fused with the demonic axe. The grand prize at the casino was the axe, and so Suisen kinda has to join the party. He doesn't really have a choice. Interestingly though, Suisen's choice is a defining aspect of his character, or more specifically, Suisen's ability to choose. When it's revealed that Suisen is just one of many Kurofune prototypes, this calls his own identity into question. With the knowledge that he may well be just another tool following orders like like all the other versions of him are, he's concerned, and reasonably so. This makes sense, right? He's an amalgamation of dozens, maybe hundreds of different souls all in one body, so which soul is his? Does he even have one? What draws him to make the choices that he does? Where does the Sea of Souls end and Suisen begin? These are all existential questions that Suisen, despite his vast array of knowledge, doesn't really have an answer to. Unfortunately, we don't get an answer to a lot of this, but I think that's okay. I mentioned this line before, but Peerless says, "Conviction is what makes you, you." The reason this line is so important for Suisen's character is because it circumvents a lot of the existential problems and questions that he was faced with. Whether or not Suisen's actions are a result of his own will, the will of Iki, or the will of one or all of the souls inside of him doesn't really matter. It's like the whole idea of, if you don't have free will, would that actually change anything? Maybe Suisen doesn't have free will, and every single action he takes is determined in that moment by an individual soul that resides within him. Or maybe he does and he's the one calling the shots, but does it really matter either way? Regardless of who's in the driver's seat, Suisen is still Suisen. He says as much when he requests that despite Iki being the predominant soul within him, he'd still like to be referred to as Suisen out of respect for the other souls as well. He recognizes that maybe he's not in full control, maybe he doesn't have free will, but that doesn't change his identity, nor does it change his actions. C4 is a wonderful character because of how she views life and mortality. She's got an excellent foil in her old friend Nitra. Both of them are obsessed with weapons and were able to connect over that fact. Now, C4 had amnesia, but I'm gonna brush over that aspect of her character as I believe her relationship with Nitra and her viewpoint on life is far more interesting. So C4 is revealed to be an angel when her fellow angel Nitra shows up and explains a bit of her past. Eventually, it's revealed that Nitra backstabbed C4 when they had a disagreement about some fundamental values and beliefs. The two learned that infernal treasures are made of souls, but their reactions were very different. C4 is disgusted by this idea and is further disturbed by the fact that the shogunate is using souls to create infernal treasures. Nitra, on the other hand, is enamored by it, and as we later find out, she finds this to be a solution to her greatest fear. See, in this world, even angels and demons will eventually grow old, change, and die. Nitra is terrified of that prospect. She wants things to stay the way they are forever, and more specifically, she really doesn't want to die. A large part of the reason for this is because she remembers the final moments of her past life. She knows what dying feels like, and she's afraid of it, but more importantly, she's just afraid of change. When she meets C4 for the first time since she backstabbed her, C is a noticeably different person, and the prospect of her best friend being someone different from who she remembers is terrifying. On multiple occasions, she says things like,
But if we become infernal treasures, we can preserve what makes us unique forever. I can't bear to get old and die one day. I want to continue to be me forever.
Fuji calls her a coward who's just afraid of change, and C4 says something I find especially meaningful.
Each day is better than the last. It's like fireworks lighting up the night. I become a new and improved me every single day.
She views this change and uncertainty in life in a more positive way. While Nitra is worried about things she enjoys going away, C4 is excited about things that she will enjoy that she doesn't know of yet. One is focused on the past and the present, while the other one looks towards the future. I love the fact that C4's obsession with explosives perfectly reflects her view on life. She compares day-to-day life to fireworks with how each one is exciting, beautiful, and different from the last. Despite the fact that they're only around for a brief moment, that moment is magnificent, and it's almost in their inherent finality that they become even more remarkable. Every day brings with it the chance for something new to happen, for new discoveries to be made, new adventures to be had. This inherent change and fluidity that defines our lives isn't something to be afraid of, but is instead something to take advantage of. Crucially, however, C4 reassures Nitra that it's okay to be afraid of death. She says,
I'm super afraid of death too, both mine and yours. But that fear is exactly what makes me give it my all.
I don't think I need to explain what this line means, as it's relatively simple, but I do love the idea that the fear of death and the inevitable end that awaits us all isn't something that should hold us back. It's something that should propel us forwards. Higan Zashosai, the strongest swordsman in all of Hinamoto, is unable to use swords. She instead picked up a spear and got pretty good at it. It may seem strange that someone with the title Swordsmaster and the strongest swordsman doesn't even use swords, but this is by design. It's not like Higan hasn't used a sword before, and it's certainly not like she can't, but she very deliberately doesn't. She's even got an ability in-game that prevents her from using swords. Higan is extremely powerful, confident, and headstrong, and is without question the most capable member of the party. This is demonstrated on multiple occasions in her ability to power through tough challenges that the rest of the party struggles with. It's even reflected through the gameplay as well, with skills like Unrestrained increasing every single one of her stats by a significant margin. She can act as both a tank and a DPS at the same time. She's obviously not a gunner or an archer, but she's still got sizable range along with high damage AoEs, and a devastating hell mode that allows her to move multiple times in a single turn. When it was all said and done, she was probably my most used unit because she was just that good. But despite all of her strengths, she still wasn't strong enough to pick up a sword after what happened to her. I think it's this contrast between how incredible she is in nearly every aspect and the pain that she hides just below the surface that makes her so likable. At a glance, you may believe that the reason she doesn't use swords is because she enjoys challenges and fighting but was so good at it that it became boring. So as a way of holding back, she decided to use spears so that fights might last more than 5 seconds. Maybe she's doing it to prove that she can master any weapon she wants, or it could be because she just found the demonic spear and prefers to use spears now that her strongest weapon is one of them. And while all of these reasons would make sense, none of them are the true cause for her reluctance to pick up a sword. You see, Higan grew up on a desolate world called Slaporo Grimjufu. It's noted by some of the party that this is the most miserable place they've ever been to, and Suisen recalls that it's often referred to as the netherworld of trials. She lost her parents and had to survive here alone until one day she met the previous Zashosai, Rekka. Zashosai is a title, not a last name by the way, it's just given to the strongest swordsmaster. She tries to steal from Rekka and is obviously unsuccessful, but is then taken in and trained by her. It's here that Higan meets Fuyo, Rekka's daughter, and Mugai, another one of Rekka's students. She says that meeting them was the first time she had ever experienced kindness, so needless to say, she became extremely close with all three. Unfortunately, she would eventually lose all of them. The one who trained Higan and taught her how to use a sword, Rekka, was first. Her death is a bit ambiguous, and I feel like they could have come up with something better than the foolish masses killed master because of her kindness, whatever that's supposed to mean. Regardless, the exact cause and details of her death don't matter nearly as much as the ripple effects that it had. Fuyo, Rekka's daughter, would soon follow, sacrificing her life to save Fuji. Finally, Mugai went insane and had to be stopped by Higan before eventually falling to opener. After the loss of his wife Fuyo and his master Rekka, Mugai's kind heart vanished, and in its place rose an unfeeling monster with nothing but a drive for more power. Higan, after losing her friend Fuyo and master Rekka, was forced to confront her fellow student Mugai and stop him once and for all. The two fought for 3 days straight until eventually Higan came out on top, but in her own words,
"You're kinder than anyone else I know, and you've experienced more pain too."
And it's because of this that she just can't bring herself to kill him. Mugai retreats and Higan lets him get away. All of this proved to be too much for the seemingly invincible Scarlet Swordsmaster. She admits that,
"No matter how hard I tried to suppress my regret, it still pained me to even hold a sword."
The pain of losing her master, losing her friend, and failing to stop Mugai was just too great to bear. These were the first people to ever show her kindness, and the sword is intrinsically linked to so many of those memories. But now, each and every one of them is gone. Not only that, but she has to live with the regret of knowing that she failed to save the one who she described as the kindest of them all. However, when it's revealed that Mugai was controlling Opener all along and wasn't really dead, all of these memories and regrets come flooding back, and in response, Higan finally faces them head on. As atonement for her past mistakes, she'll be the one to take responsibility and finish the job this time. She then delivers my personal favorite line, not just up to this point, but in the entire game. Some important context: at this point, the party is totally overwhelmed by Mugai. He's extraordinarily powerful, and even when they somehow miraculously manage to deal a fatal blow, he just regenerates and gets right back up. Canon line, Perilika's mother even sacrificed herself using powerful explosives to try to stop him, and that didn't work either. He's not even breaking a sweat, and quite plainly states that he's holding back. Mugai is this unstoppable force of nature that the party is barely holding out against, but Higan doesn't see him as such. She says,
"Mugai, you weakling! Take up your blade with your trembling hands!"
What stands before her is a coward unable to face his pain and failures, a student who insolently discarded the ways of his fallen master, and a weakling who couldn't begin to oppose her as she is now. And to put the final nail in the coffin, she actually proves it. Creating an endless loop with her spear's ability to manipulate space-time, don't think about it too much, she's able to severely weaken Mugai and give the party a chance to escape. I think what makes me love Higan's character so much is that as magnificent as she seems from the outside, she's still not perfect. She carries with her pain and regrets so significant that they actively slow her down and weaken her. She stands as an example of the idea that no one is immune to regret, but in her ability to overcome that pain, she shows that everyone is capable of moving past it. Peerless is a character who defines herself by a distorted view of reality that doesn't actually exist. She's not from Hinamoto, but she's been obsessed with both it and Bushido for a long time. Her abundance of naivety is matched only by her empathy and willingness to believe in the good in others. This combination of traits often leads to pretty severe delusion and just a general lack of understanding of the world around her. More important than anything, however, is the fact that she doesn't realize that the Bushido she's trying to pursue is in direct conflict with her core values. Peerless is someone who deeply values life, even going as far as to prevent the party from killing unless it's absolutely necessary. Even with their backs against the wall, she begs them not to seriously hurt anyone because everyone deserves a chance at life, and that life is too precious to throw away just because someone orders you to do so. She doesn't recognize the irony in her admiration of Bushido, a practice that values the idea of dying for honor or one's cause. She's forced to confront this idea not once, but twice. First, her mother sacrifices herself in an attempt to save the party from Mugai. In this moment, despite the fact that according to Bushido, Peerless' mother is doing the right thing, Peerless begs her to stop, but of course she doesn't. This is a direct and clear example of the undeniable conflict that exists between Peerless' true values and what she believes Bushido is. The second time this happens is when Fuji sacrifices himself to save Ao. It's here that Peerless finally confronts her distorted worldview and says,
Death is not a virtue! If that's what you call Bushido, I'll cut it down!
Now that she's experienced this idea firsthand not once but twice, and now that she understands what Bushido really means, she realizes that it would do nothing but hold her back. Her main goal in the world is to help people. It's to give people a second chance, to look past their negative actions and embrace the good in their hearts. She wants to save as many people as she can, and in discarding Bushido for her own personal ideals and values, she can reach her true potential. Instead of pursuing who she thinks she should be, she begins to pursue who she really is. It harkens back to the theme of identity, but takes things a step further by introducing the idea that you shouldn't allow external influences to change who and what you really are. Deep down, Peerless is just a person who wants to help people. That's it. She believes in the inherent good in everyone, and she values life and wishes to protect and preserve it above all else. Now, there's also the elephant in the room that is Peerless' parents. I saved this for the end because I think it's a bit less interesting than her ideals and her distorted worldview, and because some of it is harder to discuss due to a lack of information and context. That said, I do think there's a valuable lesson worth discussing. So Peerless' parents are Demodor Opener and Cannonline, his second in command, the two people responsible for all the damage done to Hinamoto. Naturally, Peerless feels terrible about this and even avoids telling the party out of a mixture of guilt and fear. However, C4 delivers a great line about identity here.
No matter who or what her parents are, Peerless is still Peerless. Nothing's gonna change between us.
She's effectively saying that your parents or your family don't define you. You're still who you are regardless of their actions. This is a very liberating idea, as often people will feel held back by the actions or behaviors of their parents and family, when in reality, your identity is determined by your own actions. Fuji may be one of my favorite characters in fiction. Now, it's important that you take that line with a grain of salt, or perhaps even the entire salt shaker due to recency bias, as I've just beaten the game. Although I guess by the time you're watching this, I'll have beaten it a few weeks ago, so I'll throw on screen if my thoughts have changed. With that said, Fuji's story is one of generational trauma and of accepting painful memories of the past to move on to the future. However, to fully understand Fuji, we also need to understand his father Mugai and his daughter Ao, so they're gonna come up a lot here too. Let's start with a timeline of events. At some point in time, we don't know when, Rekka, Mugai's master, is killed for her kindness. Sometime after this event, get used to the phrase sometime or at some point, since time works pretty weird in this world, Opener invades Hinamoto and defeats Mugai. Instead of killing him, Opener recognizes Mugai's immense strength and says that they should be friends. This disgusts Mugai, as he believes it's extremely dishonorable to spare his life. Later, Fuji runs away from Mugai's dojo and is kidnapped by one of his father's enemies. His mother, Fuyo, sacrifices her life to save Fuji. Fuji is distraught by this fact, but Mugai tells him to
Stop crying, Fuji. You're too soft. Your mother died because of the war. This all happened because I was weak.
This line is extremely important. Fuji was described by his mother as a very kind kid. Equally, however, Mugai was described by Higan as being the kindest person she knew before he lost to Opener and lost Rekka and Fuyo. The Mugai of today is totally different. He's now an apathetic monster who believes that emotions make you weak. The fact that he says she died because I was weak and not she died because she was weak is a crucial distinction. Mugai blames himself for everything that's happened. He's been through so much and he thinks it's all his fault. If he had been struck stronger, Fuyo wouldn't have died. If he had been stronger, he wouldn't have lost to Opener, and he finds his emotions to be the culprit, perhaps not out of any logical reason, but because he's tired of being in so much pain. He uses apathy as the solution to his suffering, because if you don't love, if you don't feel, then you can't hurt anymore. He then looks to Fuji, a blossoming young swordsman, his student, and his kind-hearted son, and he sees himself. He sees the same hopeful yet naive look in his eyes, that same kind heart that was trampled time and time again. He sees the exact same mistakes that he made, and he hates it, so he tries to make Fuji into that cold-hearted, emotionless monster that he wishes he was, but he can't do it. Not because he doesn't want to or because he doesn't have the heart for it, no, he's more than willing to do so. The problem is that Fuji is just too kind. So one day, as a sort of graduation exam, Mugai gathers all of his students along with Fuji, and it's here that he asks Fuji to kill all of them. Of course, Fuji says no, and likely expecting this outcome, but still a bit disappointed, Mugai does it himself, but not before giving Fuji the empathy killer curse. This curse ensures that if the victim ever demonstrates empathy, compassion, love, or any positive feelings towards others, it'll destroy their body. This curse is almost like a physical representation of generational trauma. It's as if Mugai is, almost literally, passing on his pain, trauma, and personal worldview to his son. Now remember how infernal treasures like Suisen, Kurofune, and the founding weapons are made of souls? Well, Mugai is the one who invented the founding weapons. He kinda wrote the book on turning demon souls into powerful weapons. So naturally, Fuji knows a thing or two about how to do this as well. He even used his knowledge to save Suisen in the story, but here, with his fellow classmates mortally wounded, he does the only thing he can think of in that moment to give them a second chance at life. He turns them all into one single infernal treasure. That infernal treasure takes the form of a little girl named Ao. This is why Ao considers Fuji her father. Tragically for both of them, however, Fuji is still cursed with empathy killer. He's entirely incapable of being the kind and loving father and mentor that he should be, that his father should have been. He begins to notice more and more that he's the very same monster that his father was, and so out of fear of doing to Ao what his father did to him, he decides his only option is to abandon her. Really think about this. Fuji is so terrified of being like his father that he genuinely believes Ao would be better off alone than with a father like him. This logic obviously makes no sense from an outsider's perspective, but through the eyes of a victim of generational trauma, it sort of checks out. Oftentimes, parents who were physically abused as children by their parents believe that as long as I'm not physically abusive, as long as I'm not like them, I can do no wrong. And they end up emotionally abusing their child instead. Or a parent will be too overbearing and controlling, causing their child to develop a parenting style that overcorrects this problem by being far too hands-off. In the case of Fuji, he believes that as long as he's not Mugai, he's relatively in the clear. He understands his actions aren't those of a good father. He knows he's not a good person for doing this, but he absolutely cannot be to Ao what his father was to him, and so he leaves. This clearly isn't a solution. All Fuji is doing here is giving Ao abandonment issues. So great, now she won't hate her father because he was a cruel, emotionless monster like Mugai, but she'll instead hate him because he didn't love her enough to stay by her side. In fact, if there were a Disgaea 8 that took place in the distant future with Ao's child as the main character, they'd likely have some sort of generational trauma as well that Ao passed down to them, and the cycle would simply repeat forever. What I love so much about Fuji though is that he's our main character. We see the events and the story through his eyes, and yet we can still see that his actions are objectively awful. We know he's a victim, we know that he's hurting, and we even know that this wouldn't have happened if it weren't for Mugai. But despite all of that, we still know that he's a terrible father. Because that's the cruel twist of generational trauma. Unless the cycle is broken, then by necessity, even the victims, the ones we relate to and consider the good guys, will become the villains. They'll become the very same monsters that they fought against, just like Fuji did to Ao. Unless the cycle is broken. Fuji recognizes this. He finds a third option. Initially, he believed that he could only either be like his father or abandon Ao. However, he now decides that he doesn't care about the curse. He's going to tell Ao how he really feels, even if it literally kills him. He refuses to allow the cycle to go on any longer, and he's successful, going as far as to give his life to save Ao. Luckily, Perilika's powers awaken just in time because the game still needs a main character and Fuji needs to face his father one final time. In the ultimate confrontation with Mugai, he reveals that the place they're currently in is where the souls of demons who demonstrated too much empathy and kindness ended up. It's a hollow void that they roam endlessly, unable to pass on to the next life. Mugai says that this is why he wants to remove empathy. He's doing it out of mercy. He doesn't want anyone else to suffer this fate, so he'll remove empathy altogether. This feels like a bit of an on-the-nose and over-the-top way way to say that being kind and having emotions will inherently cause pain, and it feels kind of unnecessary, but I digress. The whole party jumps in to reject his ideals, effectively saying that while sure, he's right, life would be easier if everyone were just apathetic and didn't feel anything, that it'd also remove what makes life worth living in the first place. It's a pretty JRPG ending, but I do want to focus on the final interaction between Mugai and Fuji. Fuji says that he'll allow his father to rest in peace by cutting down any regrets he may have. Namely, he's referring to the souls that are trapped in this place. The wandering souls gather in his sword, empowering it and allowing it to cut open a rift so that they can all escape. With no more souls to absorb and mortally wounded, Mugai mocks Fuji, congratulating him on killing
your own father. It goes to show my ideals weren't wrong.
It's here that, surprisingly, Fuji's curse activates. Mugai doesn't understand why. Fuji should hate him, but Peerless explains that Fuji didn't kill his father out of hatred, he just wanted to stop his rampage. He killed him because he had to, not because he wanted to. And it's here that we get one last twist. Mugai used Empathy Killer on himself as well. He couldn't get rid of his kindness on his own, so he used the curse to do it. He doesn't confirm this, but in his own words, there's no
need for further explanation.
He then exits by saying,
"Farewell, my hated and beloved world."
He hated this world and all of the pain it caused him, but in spite of all of that pain, deep down, he never lost the love that he had for it. Maybe Fuji doesn't forgive Mugai for all that he's done, and that's okay. I mean, he's even still cursed with Empathy Killer, almost as if to say that the trauma caused by his father will never truly go away. The two didn't hug it out in the end and live happily ever after, but Fuji does recognize that, at least to a certain degree, Mugai's actions were not caused because he was this inherently evil person, but because he was scared and hurting. Fuji tells his father that he can rest now, reassuring him that they will protect the world that he couldn't bring himself to truly hate. It's in confronting his fears of being like his father while accepting and understanding his actions that Fuji is able to end the cycle once and for all. Claiming that Disgaea 7 is proof that you can't judge a book by its cover feels a bit reductive. Sure, the game is a perfect example of that phrase. It's got over-the-top mechanics, important characters with names like See Again and Canon Line, and scenes that aren't even taken seriously by the characters in-game. All the while hiding meaningful themes and fundamentally sound gameplay just beneath the surface. Yet, just condensing it all into "you can't judge a book by its cover" feels reductive. Because what really makes Disgaea 7 special is the fact that these eccentric elements, these bizarre moments, and most importantly, this wonderfully vibrant personality aren't just the cover. They're the entire